Good evening, everyone. My name is Utkarsh Punjabi, and welcome back to the Grass channel. Together, we make grass greater than chess. Okay, so today we're going to check out about 3 or 4 games that were played between Magnus Carlsen and Jeffery Xiong just yesterday in a new concept in a new tournament called Clutch Chess. So you might be wondering, what is Clutch Chess? Well, it has a lot to do with the scoring and the prize fund. So let's go ahead and quickly check that out. Okay, so the scoring is such that you had 2 players, in this case Magnus Carlsen and Jeffery Xiong, played 6 games on day 1. Games 1 through 4 were worth 1 point each. So if you win the game, you get 1 point. If you get a draw, you get a half a point. Games 5 and 6 were worth 2 points each. Also, if you won games 5 or 6, clutch games, you get an additional bonus of $2,000 per game for winning the clutch games. Now, the players get a day off, so Sunday, today, they had a day off, and they'll play again tomorrow on Monday. When they come back on Monday, they'll continue playing games 7 through 12. Games 7 through 10 are worth 1 point each. Games 11 and 12, quote-unquote super clutch games, are now worth 3 points each. The prize fund for games 11 and 12 would be $3,000 per game. Also in this tournament, if suppose games 5, 6, and 11, all 3 games end up being draws, the money actually still rotates. So the individual that wins, say, the supposed game 12, the super clutch game, you get a prize fund of $8,000. So this is a super intriguing concept. I personally, as a viewer, love it. And for those of us that are NBA fans, we totally get the idea of the clutch gene. Also, just think about it as a viewer. You're watching player A just completely smash player B in first 10 games. Player A is just dominating, is up by 5 points in a match. However, if player B somehow manages to win game 11 and 12, so win both games, player B is the one who advances to the next round. So again, super amazing concept. As a viewer, I personally love it. So let's take a look at individuals that are participating in this tournament. So the pairings in this case were decided based on their ELO rating. So of course the participants you have in this event are Magnus Carlsen, Jeffery Xiong, Alexander Grishuk, Sasha Grishuk, Lavan Aronian, Maxime Berchiel, Lenier Dominguez, Fabiano Caruana, Maxime Berchiel-Lagrave, MVL, and Wesley So. For those of you, of course, you're all familiar with Magnus Carlsen. He has been the reigning world champion since 2013. Perhaps one of the greatest chess players alive today, if not ever. And he's going up against the 19-year-old chess prodigy, Jeffery Xiong from Plano, Texas, USA. Imagine being rated 2730. You participate in a tournament, and not only are you the worst rated player in a tournament, but somehow you have to face Magnus Carlsen in the first game, so first match, first game on day 1. Just poor 19-year-old Jeffery Xiong. If that weren't enough for Jeffery, we all remember how the last tournament that Magnus participated in ended. After a lot of chess drama, Magnus lost to Hikaru Nakamura in Armageddon. I'm just quoting Hikaru Nakamura. Of course, it's not pronounced Armageddon, it's Armageddon. But we love Hikaru, not just because he's an American player, but the fact that he's just a tremendous chess sponsor. He's doing an amazing job in just growing the game and growing the community and just providing a lot of love and support to everyone. So here's what Magnus had to say after losing to Hikaru Nakamura in the last tournament. When you are the best and cocky about it, a lot of people love to see you fail. So enjoy it while you have the chance. You deserve it. And indeed, he's right. Any tournament Magnus participates in, he should be the favorite, and he is the favorite. However, I'm calling this the Magnus Revenge Tour. And his first victim is going to be this 19-year-old kid from Plano, Texas, going up against the world champion. He's spotting Magnus 150 elo points, and if that weren't enough, he's spotting Magnus just an elevated, heightened awareness and just the ruthless aggression that we're going to see in this tournament from Magnus. So we'll check out 3 or 4 games, like I said, and the games are structured that you get 10 minutes per game and 5-second increment after each move. So we're not going to spend too much time on literally every single move because, again, it is a rapid game. So we'll focus on some of the critical lines that the players achieved and what happened in those critical lines. So let's dive into the first game. So we have day 1, match 1, game 1, Magnus with the white pieces, and let his revenge tour begin. Okay, so Magnus opens with c4. We have the English opening on the board. We have c5, the symmetrical variation, knight to c3, g6, getting ready to fianchetto the dark square bishop on g7, and you'll enjoy this long, beautiful diagonal. You have e3 from Magnus. He's going for d4, just a complete and total dominance of the center. And we have knight to f6 from Jeffery. d4, c captures on d4, e captures on d4, and Jeffery strikes immediately in the center with d5. Magnus goes for queen to b3, and now what he's saying is that, well, you have 2 defenders, but now I have 3 attackers. Okay, Jeffery continues with his plan, bishop to g7, and now you get c captures on d5. We have castles, bishop to e2, and now, of course, Magnus is preparing to get his king to the safety, but in some of the lines, you may see this bishop come to bishop to f3 and enjoy this long diagonal, but the most common continuation is, of course, getting the knight to its natural square, f3, and then just castle. Okay, so Jeffery continues with knight to a6. We have bishop to f3, and now b5. The most common continuation in this line in the games that I saw in the database is actually queen comes to b6, and the queens are actually exchanged pretty early on in the game. So it is Jeffery who wants to keep the queens on the board, and he goes for b5. Okay, so after b5, there are 4 games that have reached this same exact position, and the continuation after b5 usually, well, is knight g2 e2, and after knight g2 e2, the common continuation is b4. However, Jeffery does not go for b4. He goes for rook to b8. And it is as of move 10, we have a completely new game on our hand. So let's go ahead and check out this beauty from both the world champion El Magneto and this 19-year-old chess prodigy. So after rook to b8, getting the rook on the same line, same b file as Magnus's queen, just a beautiful preparation so far. And the game continues with bishop to f4, attacking the rook. We get rook to b6, and Magnus actually falls into the trap. The trap is knight captures on b5. So feel free to pause the video and see what this young chess prodigy from Plano, Texas had planned for Magnus Carlsen that he missed. Okay, so for those of you that found that you need to get this bishop off of defending the c7 square, congratulations, indeed that is the right idea. And how would you do that? Well, you can play g5, attack the bishop, and bishop will have to take the pawn. If bishop decides to move away to another square, well, you have g4 attacking this bishop, and this bishop is completely stuck on f3. So for those of you that found g5, congratulations, that is indeed the best continuation. So why do you need to get the bishop away? Why can't you directly play knight to c7 followed by a6? Well, that would actually lose you the game. So let's quickly check it out. So if you played knight to c7 instead of playing g5, you get bishop captures on c7, queen captures on c7, knight captures on c7, rook captures on b3, and now you're just losing your rook. So a captures on b3. And you can just resign on move 15, as this is just too dominating of a position as soon as white castles. So you do indeed have to play a move like g5. Okay, so why does g5 work? Well, we said the best continuation, which is what Magnus went with, is capturing the pawn. What if instead of capturing, you go for your own idea, which is bishop comes to d2, and I'm sure you can all see it, followed by bishop to a5, and you're going to win some material. So let's go ahead and check out if you decide not to take the pawn. So if you go bishop to d2, you still get g4, and now of course you want to castle the king side. You don't want your king side pawn structures ruined, so you get bishop captures on g4, bishop captures on g4, bishop to a5, but now knight captures on d5, winning at least one of the pawns back, bishop captures on b6, a captures on b6, and the game continues. So black has actually given up a rook and 2 pawns, but black has more than enough compensation because these 2 bishops are actually going to be monster bishops, right? And you can just remaneuver the bishop. You can keep it essentially on this diagonal as well. So that is the idea that Jeffery had in mind if you decide not to take the pawn. So after g5, indeed Magnus continued with the most precision in bishop captures on g5. So you get bishop captures on g5, knight to c7, attacking the knight, a4 defending the knight, a6 attacking the knight, d6 attacking the knight once again. But now you get e captures on d6, and the best continuation for Magnus, there's nothing more to do, is just castle, because of course you don't want to allow black another move to go for rook to e8 and put some pressure on your king and your knight. So after castles, you do indeed get a captures on b5, and now a beautiful move from Magnus, a5. Here, this is another critical position. The move that you have to play in this position is rook to a6, followed by d6, d5, closing this long diagonal. However, young Jeffery goes for rook to b8, and we'll see if the world champion finds a way to punish him, taking the rook back and going for the idea on a8. So we'll see in the game what happens. Okay, so now you get knight to g3, and now of course knight and rook want to start adding a little extra pressure to the knight on f6, as your knight is most definitely currently pinned. So knight to g3, and we have funny continuation from both Magnus and Jeffery. So you have knight to e6, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn on d4, and also followed by an attack on the queen. So Magnus goes back with bishop to e3. Jeffery goes back with knight to c7. You get bishop to g5 again, knight to e6, and bishop to e3, knight to c7. Now, of course, it is a Magnus despite being a piece down, of course, he has the advantage in pawns, in terms of pawns, but it is Magnus who does not want to draw. If you ask Jeffery, most likely he would just take the draw, considering that, again, he's going up against a world champion. He can take his chances with the white pieces, and especially in game one, you don't want to overextend your positions in some risk reward economic sense, I suppose. Okay, so after knight to c7, Magnus did not go with bishop to g5 because then it would just be a 3-4 repetition. Instead, he went with rook f to c1, going for the open c file. Okay. So after rook f to c1, you have bishop to e6, developing the bishop, the only piece that wasn't developed, and now Magnus just brings the queen back to d1. You have knight f to d5, putting pressure on the bishop on e3, but also, most importantly, closing this long diagonal, at least for the time being. Okay, Magnus starts punishing the young kid now. So you get a6, rook to a8, walking in that pin, and now even a7. The best continuation here should have been just to go for a simple idea like knight captures on e3, attacking the queen, f captures on e3, and just closing the diagonal with d5. Instead, after a7, Jeffery finds another idea, which is queen to e7, which is still fine. But now you have knight to h5, and the idea behind knight to h5 is just you're putting a lot of pressure on the g7 bishop, and if you're able to exchange your knight for a bishop, A would be a better endgame for you, and the black king would be slightly exposed, slightly naked. Okay, so, and this is the beauty of Magnus, right? That he'll squeeze the most out of the position on one side of the board, and once he has done that, he doesn't just stop. He shifts the focus all the way to the another side of the board. So this is the beauty of Magnus, that he continues to find ideas on both sides of the board, despite being a piece down, and making sure that you are under pressure from not just one side, but also both sides. Well, the other side as well. Okay, so after knight to h5, Jeffery continues with knight captures on e3. You get f captures on e3. So of course, if you want, you can get both bishops off the board, and you are not afraid to go into an end game with a bishop against a knight, or actually it's just gonna be knight versus knight. Sorry. Okay, so after, no, you do have a piece up. So yeah, it's gonna be bishop and knight versus a knight. Okay, so you get f captures on e3, and now a beautiful move from Jeffery. You have bishop to h6, saying, okay, if you want to capture my rook, go for it. I'll capture your pawn on e3, which will come with a check, and I'll go ahead and take your rook on c1. And indeed, that is exactly what happens in the game. So you get bishop captures on a8, bishop captures on e3 with a check, king to h1, bishop captures on c1, and now Magnus has to make the decision. Does he want to get the bishops off the board, or does he want to keep the bishop on the board? And he decides to take the bishops off the board. So queen captures on c1, though I do think it would have been interesting just to bring the bishop back, because you will be controlling all three squares, a8, b8, and c8, as your pawn and your bishops would do an amazing job in just constricting black's play, especially on a, b, and c file towards the utmost left corner, I suppose. Okay, so, but Magnus goes for queen captures on c1, and now you have rook captures on a8, and queen to c3. Queen to c3 is a very interesting move, because not only does it allow you the access to g3 and going for some harassing ideas, but also you can jump to c6 and you'll have access to this diagonal as well. And should you need to, you can play d5 and then have access to this diagonal as well. So beautiful centralizing move from Magnus. After queen to c3, you get knight to d5, attacking the queen, and now queen to c6, going for the diagonal like we already saw. After queen to c6, actually here after knight to d5, Engine recommends that you go for a play on the other side of the board first. So the recommended move from Engine is queen to g3 with a check. Of course, you can't go to h8 because it would just be mate in one. So you have to go king to f8. Now you get queen to g7 with a check, king to e8, queen to h8 with a check. The only real move you have, queen to f8, blocking, but now knight to g7 with a check, king to e7, keeping an eye on the queen, and now queen captures on h7. So the argument that the Engine is making here is that, well, you have managed to get a connected pass pawn, just open line, just an open highway for your pawns on G file and H file. And even though if you go into an endgame with this king being slightly more active, your king will actually do a good job in terms of running with the pawns. So that's the argument that the Engine is making. But okay, after knight to d5, Magnus went with the human move, queen to c6. So after queen to c6, you get knight to c7 and queen to b7. So after Magnus played queen to b7, he had 43 seconds left on the clock. Jeffery had 29 seconds left on the clock. So again, both players are under tremendous time pressure. And here there is actually a move that both Jeffery and Magnus missed. Queen to b7 is a huge blunder. So both of them did not find this move, at least in the game. Feel free to pause the video and find the right continuation for black. Again, you have more than 29 seconds. You can feel free to pause and find the right idea. Okay, so the correct continuation in this position should have been bishop to d5. Bishop to d5 is a quite powerful move. The reason why it's powerful is because now if you get queen to b8 with a check, you can block with your knight. And the reason why you can block with your knight is because your rook is now protected. Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, that means you're also putting pressure on the g2 square, and your queen is ready to jump to g5 and deliver a checkmate in 2, basically. So what could be the continuation in this line? The best continuation would have been queen to b8 with a check, knight to e8, and now bringing the knight back, knight to f4, attacking the bishop, and defending the pawn on g2. And of course, black wouldn't mind just going for queens off the board, queens exchange. You get queen to b7, queen captures on b7, bishop captures on b7, and this is a totally winning endgame with you being up an entire minor piece. So this is the line that young Jeffery missed. However, not only did he miss this line, he also managed to somehow blunder his chances of either winning or drawing the game in the same move. He played bishop to g4. Feel free to pause the video one more time and find this super easy continuation for the world champion El Magneto and find out why this is a totally losing move. Or I shouldn't say losing, because of course the chances of draws are still great, but this is such a blunder. So feel free to pause the video and find the right combination for Magnus Carlsen. Okay, congratulations to everyone that found the right continuation, as Magnus did indeed find it in this position. You get queen to b8 with a check, and now of course this time you have to block with your queen. So you get queen to f8, knight to f6 with a check, forking the king, forking the bishop, king to g7, attacking the knight, but now you get queen captures on f8 with a check, king captures on f8, and you just get a free piece with knight captures on g4. And this is why you had a winning position, but now all of a sudden you went from winning to, at best, you can draw the position, considering especially you didn't even have to give up any pawn to win that bishop if you are Magnus Carlsen. So yeah, somehow under time pressure, though both players are under extreme time pressure, Jeffery not only did not find the winning idea, somehow he managed to find the losing idea in the same move. So quite a sad net result, I suppose. Okay, so after knight captures on g4, you get king to e7. Of course, you just want to go after the a7 pawn now, but now you get knight to e3, king to d7, d5. d5 is a beautiful move, just blocking any entrance from c6 and c6 and e6. And now king to c8. After king to c8, you get knight to f5, and of course black king is forced to come back to d7. If the black king doesn't, of course, for a price of one pawn, you can start gobbling up all these other pawns just with your knight. So of course black king would have to come back. Here Magnus goes with h4, though I think the best continuation indeed would have been just to bring the knight back and keep this king and the knight tied from ever coming to c6 and e6. It would have been far more dominating, but okay, I mean, it's fine. So he goes for h4 and starts pushing the pawns on the other side of the board. The beauty of Magnus Carlsen. So after h4, you get knight captures on d5. That was actually a very good pawn for you, but okay, whatever. Rook to a6, going for the pawn on d6, and it would win you some material. So now you get knight to c7, rook captures on d6 with a check, king to e8, and now, of course, you can't go back, and that's okay, because you can start picking up the other pawns. So after king to e8, you get a rook to h6, rook captures on a7, rook captures on h7, and now knight to e6. After knight to e6, you have h5. Just keep pushing the pawns, baby. And b4. Let's see who's faster. h6, rook to a5, and now g4. Though I thought in this position, honestly, Magnus should have just gone with his instincts of, hey, I can just go ahead and push the h pawn all the way through, right? So, and it would actually net you 2 additional tempi in the race of going for the promotion on the b file versus going for the promotion on h file. So what could be the best continuation? Well, the best continuation is rook to h8 with a check, king goes to d7, knight to g3. Knight to g3 is extremely important, as we'll see. Once you have an idea of starting to harass the white king from the back, so rook to a1 with a check, well, you can just move your king to h2, and there won't be any more follow-up checks on h1 because your knight beautifully guards both h1 and f1. And again, that's as safe of a king as you can have, especially in an endgame. So knight to g3, you get knight to g5. Of course, you would want to go ahead and give up your knight for the pawn on h7. So you get knight to g5, h7, rook to a1 with a check, king to h2, and now you just have to capture that pawn. If you decide not to capture and play a move like, say, rook to b1, right? So if you play rook to b1, there are 2 tempis that white could actually be up by here. What are the 2 tempis? Well, rook to d8 with a check, king captures on d8, and the H pawn gets promoted to a queen with a check. So now you just basically end up winning the game, as there's nothing black will be able to do in terms of taking the pawn or having some harassing ideas from the back. So after king to h2, of course, you would have to capture. So you get knight captures on h7, rook captures on b7, rook to b1, going for the pawn on b2. But you have rook captures on f7 with the check, king to c6, and now rook to f2. And this is completely winning, absolutely winning. So I thought Magnus should have trusted his instincts of just promoting the pawn. Instead, he's like, okay, fine, I'll just bring the other pawn into the game as well, and I'll defend my knight this way. But again, knight to f3 would be better. So, okay, after g4, you get a rook to a1 with a check, king to h2, rook to a2, rook to h8 with a check, king to d7, king to g3, rook captures on b2, h7, rook to b3 with a check, king to h4. I mean, you're just basically helping the king move up the board. So whatever. Rook to b1. And this is the second time in the game where Magnus tries to just give the game away. First with queen to b7, and that time Jeffery did not find the right continuation with bishop to d5. This time he plays g5. Please feel free to pause the video and see why this is a blunder. Okay, so the right continuation in this position should have been something we have already seen. Knight to g3, blocking the h1 square. Why is that important? Well, let's see who's faster again. b3, rook to d8 with a check. And now, of course, you don't want to capture with your king, because when the pawn gets promoted, you are giving additional tempi. So you get knight captures on d8, and the h pawn gets promoted to a queen. And even though you are not up by 2 tempi, you are still up by 1 tempi. So you can just come back and you can just capture. You can still harass the black king, and this would be a far superior position for you. Just turning your rook into a queen without essentially losing anything. You still have the g4 pawn. Okay, so that should have been the continuation. So after g5, Jeffery temporarily finds the right idea. He goes for b3, knight to g3, and somehow he inexplicably plays knight to f4. The move that he should have played in this position is b2, keep promoting the pawn, keep pushing the pawn. You get rook to d8 with a check. That one additional tempi is important. So you get knight captures on d8, h pawn gets promoted to a queen. But now Jeffery has this sneaky idea, which is rook to h1 with a check, sacrificing his rook in return. So you get knight captures on h1, and now the b pawn gets promoted to a queen. And again, both players are under extreme time pressure, so you never know how the game ends. But theoretically speaking, a queen, knight, and a pawn versus a king. So the same pieces for one another, same material for one another, should result in a draw, theoretically. Okay, so after knight to g3, Jeffery did not find the right continuation to this time at least draw the game, and he played knight to f4, and this is just a totally losing move. You get king to g4, attacking the knight, knight to g6, going for the rook, but now rook to g8, b2, you don't have enough tempi now. You get rook captures on g6, rook to h1, and now you don't even have to capture. You can just go rook to b6 and go for the pawn. And it is on move 59 that the young Jeffery Xiong resigned the game. And indeed, El Magneto, the king of the elitist community, begins his revenge tour with a win. And his poor opponent has to suffer through all 12 games. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. So that's all the time we have for game one. That's the coverage of game one. Magnus is up 1-0. Please stay tuned for our coverage of about 2 or 3 additional games. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with as many people as possible. Please help us grow. Thank you very much. Have a good night.